There comes a moment when you realize something unsettling. It's not that he doesn't hear you. It's that he knows you'll keep speaking. You send the message, you explain your feelings, you wait, and the silence on the other side isn't accidental. It's comfortable. Because as long as you're reacting, reaching, filling the space, he never has to. But here's what changes everything. The day you stop responding the way he expects, the day you don't explain, don't ask, don't chase clarity, something shifts inside him. Silence doesn't beg. Silence doesn't justify itself. Silence forces reflection. When you go quiet, the noise he avoided finally catches up to him. Your absence becomes louder than your words ever were. And for the first time, he has to sit with the consequences of his choices. This isn't about playing games. It's about reclaiming the power you gave away piece by piece every time you spoke when you should have paused. Because when you match his silence, you stop proving your worth, and you start reminding him of it. And that's when silence stops being weakness and becomes unforgettable. Silence in a relationship is rarely empty. It's filled with meaning, interpretation, and emotional weight. When communication suddenly drops, the mind instinctively tries to fill in the gaps. That's where psychology steps in. Humans are wired to seek closure, reassurance, and emotional feedback. When those needs aren't met, the brain doesn't relax. It fixates. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty demands attention. What makes silence so powerful is that it removes predictability. When someone knows you will always respond, explain, or pursue resolution, they feel emotionally safe without investing effort. But when that pattern breaks, their sense of control weakens. The brain registers the change as a loss, even if nothing was verbally stated. Loss activates deeper emotional processing than words ever could. Silence also disrupts emotional validation. Conversations, even arguments, still provide connection. Silence cuts off that emotional supply. The nervous system notices the absence and starts searching for meaning. Questions arise. Did I misjudge this person? Did I push too far? Did I lose something valuable? These questions don't come from manipulation. They come from discomfort, and discomfort forces awareness. There's also the concept of emotional contrast. When someone is used to your presence, your energy, your availability, the sudden lack of it creates a psychological void. The brain highlights what's missing more vividly than what was always there. That's why silence often makes feelings resurface rather than disappear. Most importantly, silence shifts responsibility. Instead of you carrying the emotional labor, the other person is left alone with their thoughts. They can no longer outsource emotional processing to your reactions. This internal reflection is what leads to regret, clarity, or realization. Silence isn't about punishment, it's about boundaries. It's the moment you stop over-explaining your worth and allow the absence of your voice to speak for itself. And in relationships, what's unsaid often leaves the deepest impression. Explaining yourself feels like the mature thing to do. It sounds reasonable, fair, and emotionally responsible, but there's a quiet line where explanation turns into over-justification, and that's where your value begins to slip. When you repeatedly explain your feelings to someone who already understands but chooses not to respond, you're not communicating, you're negotiating your worth. The moment you start proving why you deserve clarity, respect, or consistency, the dynamic shifts. Instead of being met as an equal, you position yourself as someone seeking approval. Psychologically, people assign value based on what feels scarce and self-assured. When your energy becomes overly available, your words begin to lose impact, not because they aren't valid, but because they no longer carry boundaries. Explaining also removes emotional consequence. When someone behaves carelessly, and you immediately follow it with explanations, rationalizations, or long messages, you cushion them from discomfort. They don't have to sit with the weight of their actions, because you've already softened the landing. Over time, this teaches them that no matter what they do, you'll always translate their behavior into something understandable, forgivable, or excusable. There's also an unspoken message hidden in constant explanation. I'm afraid you'll leave if I don't clarify myself. Even if you never say it aloud, the energy comes through, and when fear enters communication, attraction and respect quietly exit. Confidence doesn't demand to be understood, it assumes it. Another overlooked truth is that people rarely need more information, they need more accountability. If someone genuinely cares, a simple expression of your feelings is enough. When you keep explaining after being ignored, dismissed, or minimized, you're not being patient, you're overriding your own intuition. True value is felt when words are measured, not excessive. When you stop over-explaining, you create space for the other person to either rise to your standards or reveal their limitations, and that silence, that pause, speaks louder than any paragraph ever could. When you stop chasing, the first thing he feels isn't heartbreak, it's confusion. He's accustomed to your presence, filling the gaps, your messages smoothing over distance, your effort keeping the connection alive. Your pursuit became part of the emotional background. So when it disappears, the absence doesn't register as loss right away. It registers as disruption. At first, there's a sense of relief mixed with disbelief. He assumes the silence is temporary, that you're busy, that you'll reach out soon, because patterns feel permanent until they're broken. But as time passes and nothing arrives, the quiet grows heavier. The emotional safety net he relied on without realizing it is gone. Then comes irritation. Not because you did something wrong, but because your withdrawal removes his advantage. He can no longer engage on his terms only. He starts checking his phone more than he admits. He replays old conversations, searching for the moment things shifted. Silence has a way of pulling memories to the surface that effort once kept buried. After irritation comes curiosity. Your absence introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty invites thought. He wonders if you've emotionally detached, if you've finally reached your limit, or worse, if you've moved on. This is where the power truly shifts. Not because you're trying to provoke a reaction, but because you're no longer predictable. Eventually reflection sets in. Without your emotional labor holding everything together, he's left alone with the reality of what he contributed, or failed to. He feels the weight of unreturned effort, ignored moments, and chances he assumed would always be there. Regret doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, in moments when he expects your energy and realizes it's gone. What he feels most deeply is the loss of access. Not just to you, but to the version of himself that felt desired without having to earn it. When you stop chasing, you stop compensating for imbalance, and that forces him to confront something uncomfortable. You weren't asking for too much, you were giving too much. And by the time he understands that, the dynamic has already changed. Power in relationships is rarely declared. It's established quietly through patterns of effort, attention, and emotional availability. The moment you stop chasing, those patterns fracture, and that's when the shift happens. Not gradually, instantly, because power was never about control. It was about who cared more loudly. When you pull your energy back, the emotional center of gravity moves. Before, the relationship revolved around your reactions, your explanations, your availability, your willingness to keep things going. That gave the other person comfort without responsibility. But once that energy is removed, the balance breaks. He no longer dictates the pace, the depth, or the direction by simply doing less. Now, his silence meets yours, and equality replaces imbalance. What makes this shift so immediate is contrast. Humans don't notice constant presence, they notice change. The sudden absence of your effort highlights how much of the connection depended on you. That realization doesn't come through logic. It's felt, and what's felt alters behavior faster than words ever could. Another layer of this shift is psychological positioning. When you stop pursuing clarity or reassurance, you're no longer asking to be chosen. You're choosing yourself. That internal decision changes how you carry yourself, how you respond, and what you tolerate. Confidence doesn't announce itself, but it's unmistakable. And once someone senses it, they respond differently. The dynamic also shifts because silence introduces accountability. Without your emotional labor filling the gaps, he must now decide whether to step forward or step away. There's no middle ground. You've removed the option to stay passive while still benefiting from your presence. That forces action, or exposure. Perhaps the most overlooked change is internal. Power shifts not because he suddenly values you more, but because you value yourself enough to stop overextending. You're no longer negotiating for attention or consistency. You're observing, and observation creates clarity. In that clarity, roles realign. You become grounded, less reactive, more selective. He becomes aware, uncertain, and reflective. Not because you manipulated the situation, but because you stopped compensating for imbalance. And once that happens, the dynamic can never return to what it was. Silence and emotional detachment often get confused, but they are not the same thing. Silence is an action. Emotional detachment is a decision. One can exist without the other, and understanding the difference is what keeps silence from becoming self-betrayal. Silence can come from strength. It's the pause you choose when words would only drain you further. It's stepping back because you've already said enough, not because you don't care. In this state, your feelings are still present, but you're no longer offering them to someone who isn't holding them with care. Silence here is intentional. It protects your energy instead of abandoning your emotions. Emotional detachment, on the other hand, happens internally. It's when your nervous system finally relaxes after being on constant alert. You stop waiting, stop hoping for different behavior, stop replaying conversations in your head. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the moment you realize you don't need distance to punish someone. You need distance to return to yourself. The danger comes when silence is used without awareness. If you're silent but still emotionally tethered, constantly checking for messages, interpreting every delay, rehearsing what you'd say if they reached out, then silence becomes suffering. That's not empowerment, that's suppression. Healthy silence is accompanied by emotional movement. You redirect your focus. You fill the space with things that ground you. You stop organizing your days around someone else's availability. Detachment grows naturally when silence is paired with self-respect. Another key difference is expectation. Silence with expectation keeps you stuck. Detachment releases expectation entirely. You're no longer waiting for an apology, a realization, or a return. You're open to outcomes, not attached to one. When silence evolves into emotional detachment, the power dynamic shifts internally, not externally. You're no longer measuring your worth by someone's response. You're measuring it by how peaceful you feel without one. That's when silence stops being a strategy and becomes a transition, not away from them, but back to yourself. Choosing self-respect over reaction is one of the hardest shifts to make because reactions feel justified. They feel human. When someone pulls away, dismisses you, or leaves things unresolved, the instinct is to respond immediately, to explain, to defend, to demand clarity. Reaction gives the illusion of control. Self-respect requires restraint. Self-respect begins the moment you pause and ask yourself a different question. Not why are they doing this to me, but why am I about to abandon myself to be understood by someone who isn't listening? That pause is powerful. It interrupts old patterns. It gives you space to choose dignity over urgency. Reactions are fueled by emotion seeking relief. They want the discomfort to end now. Self-respect is fueled by long-term awareness. It understands that not every feeling needs to be expressed to the person who caused it. Some feelings need to be honored privately, processed safely, and released without performance. When you react, you hand over your emotional steering wheel. Your mood, your tone, your sense of worth becomes dependent on their behavior. Self-respect does the opposite. It recenters your emotional authority. You stop asking for permission to feel secure. You stop translating your needs into smaller, more acceptable versions. There's also a quiet confidence in non-reaction that can't be faked. It's not silence out of pride or punishment. It's silence born from clarity. You know what you deserve, and you're no longer interested in convincing someone of it. That energy shift is felt instantly, even if nothing is said. Choosing self-respect also means accepting uncomfortable truths. It means acknowledging when someone has shown you, repeatedly, that they cannot meet you where you are. Reaction tries to change that reality. Self-respect accepts it and responds accordingly. Not with bitterness, but with boundaries. This choice doesn't make you cold. It makes you grounded. You still care, but you care without self-sacrifice. You still feel, but you don't bleed emotionally just to stay connected. Over time, self-respect rewires your relationships. People either rise to meet your standards or remove themselves from your life. Both outcomes protect your peace. And the most important part, You stop regretting your responses, because every choice you make is aligned with who you are becoming, not who you were afraid of losing. Regret doesn't arrive the moment you go silent. It arrives slowly in the spaces where your presence used to live. At first, he barely notices. Life continues. Distractions fill the time, but silence has a way of settling in. And once it does, it starts asking questions he can't ignore. What makes your silence so powerful is that it removes the emotional buffer you once provided. You were the one who softened conversations, who reached out after tension, who kept the connection warm even when it cooled on his end. Without that effort, the relationship doesn't just pause, it reveals its true temperature, and that realization lingers. Regret begins when memory meets contrast. He remembers how accessible you were, how forgiving, how present. But now, there's nothing to compare those memories to except absence. Silence sharpens recollection. It highlights not just what he lost, but how casually he treated it while it was there. There's also a loss of validation. When you were present, your attention reinforced his sense of importance. Your interest made him feel chosen without requiring consistency. When that disappears, it creates an internal void. Not because he needs you to survive, but because he didn't realize how much of his emotional comfort came from your availability. Silence also removes the opportunity for repair. When you stop reacting, stop initiating, stop reopening the door, he loses the chance to fix things on his timeline. That's when urgency appears. Not always expressed outwardly, but felt internally. Regret thrives when opportunity feels closed. Another layer of regret comes from self-confrontation. Without your responses to distract him, he's left alone with his own behavior. The missed calls, the delayed replies, the moments he chose ease over effort, they resurface. Not as guilt imposed by you, but as awareness he can't outsource. What hurts most is the realization that you didn't leave loudly. You didn't demand. You didn't beg. You simply withdrew with dignity. That kind of exit leaves no argument to win, no version of events to rewrite, just truth. By the time regret fully forms, the dynamic has already changed. Your silence didn't push him away. It showed him what life feels like without you, and that lesson arrives far later than the moment you walked away. Becoming unforgettable was never about saying the perfect thing or leaving a dramatic final impression. It was never about making someone realize your value through words. What makes you unforgettable is the way you chose yourself when it would have been easier to keep reaching. People remember consistency more than passion. They remember how you showed up, how you cared, how you gave without keeping score. But what they never forget is the moment that consistency disappeared. Not out of spite, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect. That contrast etches itself into memory. When you stop trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, something profound happens. You reclaim your emotional energy. You move differently. You speak less but with more intention. You respond instead of react. That shift changes how you see yourself long before anyone else notices. Being unforgettable isn't about being missed every day. It's about being remembered in moments that matter. When he encounters silence where your warmth used to be. When situations arise and your perspective is absent, when he realizes the peace he feels now came at the cost of the connection he didn't protect, your silence becomes a mirror, not a weapon. It reflects what was taken for granted. It shows the impact of choices without assigning blame. And mirrors are uncomfortable because they don't argue, they simply reveal. The most powerful part of this transformation is internal. You stop defining your worth by someone's ability to recognize it. You no longer need closure from someone who couldn't offer consistency. Your growth closes the chapter more completely than any conversation ever could. Unforgettable people aren't loud. They don't chase acknowledgement. They leave a presence that lingers because it was genuine, grounded, and rare. And when it's gone, it leaves space. Space that can't be filled easily. So if your silence feels heavy right now, let it. It's not emptiness, it's evolution. You're not disappearing, you're becoming someone who no longer needs to prove their value. And that version of you, that version is impossible to forget. Closing a chapter in a relationship isn't about delivering a dramatic farewell or making someone feel your absence in a calculated way. It's about understanding what you've learned, reclaiming your energy, and giving yourself the clarity you didn't have before. Reflection is the final piece of the puzzle. The moment where all the previous choices, the silence, the boundaries, the self-respect, come together and form a new perspective. When you look back, you realize that every moment you spent explaining yourself, chasing attention, or seeking validation wasn't wasted. It was a lesson. It taught you what behavior is acceptable and what drains you emotionally. It showed you where the balance of effort should lie and highlighted the value of self-awareness in any relationship. Reflection isn't about blaming him or replaying mistakes endlessly. It's about observing patterns, understanding your own responses, and learning to honor your own boundaries without guilt. Silence and self-restraint, when paired with reflection, become transformative. You begin to notice not just what the other person did or didn't do, but how your own energy was being spent. You see clearly where compromise becomes self-sacrifice, and where patience turns into overinvestment. Reflection allows you to separate attachment from attachment to outcomes. You start to recognize that your worth isn't dependent on someone else's acknowledgement. It's inherent, grounded, and unshakable. This stage also helps you recognize the subtle power of presence versus absence. You realize that when someone truly values you, they will meet your energy halfway. But when they don't, your absence teaches more than confrontation ever could. Reflection allows you to appreciate the lessons without bitterness and understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're statements of self-respect. Finally, reflection invites growth. It shows you that the choices you make in silence, in restraint, and in self-care shape not just the current relationship, but your entire approach to future connections. You become more selective, more grounded, and more confident in your ability to protect your emotional energy. You recognize that every pause, every withheld reaction, and every conscious choice to honor yourself was not a loss. It was a step toward becoming a stronger, wiser version of yourself. In the end, closing thoughts aren't about regret. They're about acknowledgement of your strength, your growth, and your ability to rise above the patterns that no longer serve you. Reflection turns silence into clarity and emotional restraint into empowerment, leaving you prepared for the relationships that truly deserve your presence.